Rachelle Dene Poth, welcome to Competencies Without a Classroom. I'm personally super excited to have you here. You and I have had the chance to get to know each other a little bit better these past few months, years or so. So yeah. I am personally excited for everyone who's listening to also get the chance to get to know you and check out some of the amazing work that you're up to. But before we get into that, Rachelle, I'm going to start this episode the same way that we start every episode. We start off with the most important question that you're going to get today. It also helps to set a bit of a tone for the rest of the interview. And quite frankly, it's the question that our listeners want an answer to. So with that, Rachelle, when it comes to pineapple on pizza, are you a yes or a no on that one?
I haven't had it often enough, but I'm going to say probably more a no.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah. If you're not accustomed to the warmness and the sweetness of the pineapple in regular settings, then it might throw you off a little bit. So that's fair. Luckily, I mean, I tend to believe that that's the wrong answer. That's my opinion. But we have the rest of the episode for you to win our listeners back. So let's start off with, who is Rachelle Dene Poth and what are you doing for work right now, Rachelle?
Yeah, so I am a Spanish and STEAM teacher. I teach students in grades 8 through 12. I've also taught French. I work as a consultant. I'm also an attorney. So I love school, and I teach just about, like 20 minutes from Pittsburgh. I've been teaching at my school for a long time. I don't say how many years anymore, but I've been there a while, and love what I do, love teaching languages. And it's exciting every single day, especially too with my STEAM class on emerging technology, but also digital citizenship. And then we focus on all of these cool things like augmented virtual reality and artificial intelligence. And I like it because it pushes me to keep learning. And that's what I'm all about.
That's super cool. Have you heard of an organization called the Knowledge Society?
Perhaps.
You should Google it afterwards. It's tks.world. One of the co-founders of the organization was on season 1 of the podcast, which is when I got introduced to the really cool stuff they're doing. But it's essentially, they refer to it as a human accelerator. Easier way to understand it's an after-school program. So students spend some time on Saturdays, but they have projects to do during the week. And it's all about these emerging technologies that you talk about. So I bet they have some pretty cool resources that you might be able to borrow from. They're always doing talks with professionals from Google and Tesla and NASA, that kind of stuff that you can introduce to your students as well.
No, that sounds like I need to check it out.
You definitely got to check it out. Yeah. So Rachelle, let's jump into the main reason we're here today. So as I mentioned with season 1 of the podcast, our main focus was on talking to industry professionals. We know that as educators that these 21st century skills, these core competencies, they're super important. It's what our students need to be developing to be successful today and when they move on to industry, if they do move on to industry. But it's really easy to tell a student you need to be a problem solver, you need to be a critical thinker. What does it actually look like in the workplace? And that's what season 1 was focused on. We heard the what, we heard the how, what students can do to stand out from everybody else when they're applying for those opportunities. But we also know that educators are doing a really great job of developing those skills in their students. I've just had the experience of hearing so many of those stories and then realizing that often those stories are being siloed. So what we're trying to do with season 2 is amplify the voice of the educator and allow others to hear from the amazing things happening in their classroom as it relates to developing these 21st century skills in their students. So the first question I usually love to ask, Rachelle, is can you give us an example of something that would happen in your classroom, some kind of activity that you do with your students to promote the development of these 21st century skills?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because as a language teacher, even just today in my classroom, I was talking to my students about, I hope that you go on to become Spanish teachers because we need them. But years ago, realistically, I was thinking not all students will go on and major or minor in Spanish or become language teachers at some point in the future. So what else can I do to help them to be prepared for the future? And there are a lot of things that I was doing wrong for many years in my classroom, too long of a list to go into, but one of them was project-based learning. And years ago, somebody had said to me, oh, you do PBL, right? Project-based learning. And I said, and I thought it was a strange question. I said, yes, of course I do PBL. But I wasn't actually doing PBL. I was having my students do learning based on projects, which was a very linear, like, here's our topic, here's your project, let's move on to the next chapter in that case. Okay. And it wasn't until I explored it a bit more to find out what authentic PBL was. And so from that point on, this is probably 4 years ago now, could be a little bit longer, but I looked into PBL, I looked at what the benefits were, and I thought it was a great opportunity to bring into my classroom for my Spanish 3 and 4 students at the time, because they could focus on something they were interested in learning about.
Yeah.
They could be more independent in it. And I told them, like, I'm not going to kind of hover over you. I want you to find something that you're curious about. And then from that, they had that independence. And so I let them make a lot of decisions in the classroom, like what days, what weeks, when do you want to have this ready for? How do you want to be assessed with it? But then throughout that process, what I noticed is, I mean, they were building a lot, obviously language skills in the process as they were learning about different areas of, Spanish speaking countries, for example, but they were also building their skills for collaborating, because initially they worked on their own, but I had set up using Edmodo to have them connect with students in Argentina and Spain. And so first it was just conversation. So they were learning how to interact online, ask questions, make those relationships happen. And then we started to add different tools, like a video tool so they could see each other, then exchanging ideas. And so they were not only learning about different countries of like that spoke the language that they were learning, but they were also learning about like real world issues, because we brought in the Sustainable Development Goals. And so like, I just noticed that the students were invested in the learning. And what I thought, it took a bit of time for me to begin, because like I was doing it wrong, but I looked at a couple resources. I talked with the students about, this is why I want to try PBL with you. This is what it looks like. We'll work on this together. And so we were kind of part of a team. And so throughout that process, they built their skills definitely for creativity, because they came up with interesting ways to display what they had learned and share it. Communicating ideas, not just with ourselves in our classroom, but with the other students in other countries. Collaborating whenever they would work together on projects and one of their classmates wasn't there. Problem solving, because some of them actually then shifted from doing like project-based to, hey, we found this is happening in this country, we want to come up with like a problem, like a way to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And so all of these different skills, but I knew it was working because the students, whenever they would present to their classmates, they would not necessarily have to read from, a script or presentation. Like they were engaged, they were just speaking from their excitement from what they learned. Yeah. And the other students were engaged in it as well, it was more interactive. And the best part of it was that I had so many students that said, I stopped caring about the grade. I just cared about what was I going to learn next? What could I go, or where could I go from here? What could I do next? And that was it. And so I just thought, why didn't I do this years ago? And it's not really difficult to get started with. And I think it's something that works regardless of if you're in person, fully virtual, or hybrid, because you don't necessarily need to be in that same space. And it helps students to develop a lot of those skills that transfer into whatever they're going to do after they leave high school, whether it's college or career.
I love that answer so much, Rachelle. I mean, I've been a big fan of project-based learning for years now. I mean, the digital portfolio tools that we create are amazing when it comes to documenting evidence of the different work that students are doing from start to finish, and reflecting on everything you're doing as part of that. You nailed so many of those core competency and 21st century skills, and you're allowing your students to solve real world problems, which from a lot of what I read and learned recently is really when they turn on, when they know there isn't some answer in the back of the textbook, and they be able to connect it to one of their curiosities or their interests, and know that they may be able to solve a real world problem that needs a solution that isn't present right now. So they're going to put everything they have into it, which is so cool that you're doing that. You talked about it being a learning experience, and of course it's never gonna be perfect out of the gate. Do you have some resources, maybe some that you've created on your own, or others that you can point teachers to that helped you become more proficient as it relates to project-based learning?
Yeah, it all came to be because however long ago it was, I was at a conference and I had just finished reading the book Launch by AJ Giuliani and John Spencer. Okay. And that's where I realized that I wasn't doing PBL, because there was a quote in there about, if you assign a project and you get back 30 the same thing, it's not a project, it's a recipe. So that was, I was like, okay, so that's one thing. So that book, I went to it was at the Buck Institute, but now it's a PBL Works, and looked at, they had rubrics, they had examples, they had so much, they had letters for parents, they had everything to start with. I took a ton of notes, and then I had my students at the beginning of the year go through with me. We looked at the essential elements of PBL and talked about it. We also looked at different rubrics for assessment. And then also a book by Don Wettrick, Pure Genius. And actually, Don Wettrick had talked to my students a couple of weeks in, because they were struggling with coming up with like essential questions and what to focus on. So we use Skype. There was another book, Hacking Project-Based Learning by Erin Murphy and Ross Cooper. And later on in the year, Ross joined us with, it might have been Skype, and had my students present their essential questions to him. And he was tough. He's like, but why do you want to learn about that? Like, what are you really trying to understand? Cool. So those are books that are great. And there was another book too from ISTE. It was Reinventing or Reimagining Project-Based Learning is another one. So I had all of those. So any of those would be great. I mean, definitely PBL Works is where I started, and I recommend, or anybody can send me a message and I'd be happy to share.
There you go. Okay, we'll link to all of those books and PBL Works and everything you just talked about in the show notes of this. But yeah, it's a fantastic starting point. And to your point, you're never going to be done learning, right? You're always going to want to try new things and involve new people. So it's super cool that you did that. One other skill that I'm assuming your students were likely to develop from this project is just empathy as well, right? Just talking to those other students, trying to get an understanding of where they're coming from, not just physically, but what does their classroom setup look like? What does their day-to-day look like, right? So many cool opportunities from a project like that. It's awesome to hear you doing that. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to turn over to some rapid fire questions for you. So congrats, you're now the superintendent of your school district. And you just talked about a number of those different competencies, but now you're being tasked with deciding one of them. One of these competencies that every one of your grade 12 students needs to display evidence of in order to graduate. You can only pick one. What is that skill?
It's always so hard to pick one thing. Gosh, and I'm superintendent too, so that's even more difficult. Yeah. I think that it's important, and this is something for us as teachers too, and it's not something that I was ever really good at necessarily, was like reflecting and being able to look at work that you've done and analyze it and then self-assess like your own growth and being self-aware. And so it ties into social emotional learning, but I think that all students should be able to look at where they started and identify like, what are my strengths? What are areas that I could grow in? What are my interests? And be able to identify that, because they can pull all of that together and kind of self-assess and evaluate, which if we do things like PBL, I mean, that's part of what I did, is I had them do like peer assessments, peer feedback, and self-assessments. And I just think that art of reflection is so important as well. And I think if all students have a chance to look at like the big picture of their learning journey across multiple years, or the same class multiple years, and be able to kind of identify their areas, like I mentioned, then I think that's kind of not really just one. I kind of skirted that a little bit, but.
No, I think that's a great answer. Reflection, self-reflection, and to your point, you said teachers as well. It's not just something you're going to be doing as a student, right? It's a great skill to develop throughout your whole life. A lot of the conversations I'm having with students and educators are about, my students are stressed. They're not really sure what's going to happen after high school. They're not really sure what they're interested in. Self-reflection is a great way to start identifying patterns in what you're interested in. Oh, I really enjoyed this project more than that project. Well, what did you enjoy about that project? Did you feel like you gave it your all? Why did you give this one your all and maybe not that one? And it leads to, those students just wanting to explore things maybe that they wouldn't have if they didn't take the time to self-reflect on it. Mm-hmm. Rachelle, what's a life skill that you weren't taught in high school, but maybe that you wish you were?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot, because that was a long time ago. I mean, I don't know so much about life skill necessarily, but just skills like financial literacy is one. Just, I didn't, my school was divided into different tracks. Basically, it was college prep, there was business, there was VOTech, and it was already defined for us the types of courses we were going to take. And so I never took typing. I never learned how to balance a checkbook or anything like that. And just that awareness of a lot of those skills. I mean, now, like in my school and many schools, that's a requirement for graduation. And I keep telling my students, I said, I wish I would have had that opportunity to do that, because it's clearly essential. So that's the one that comes to mind, just with all things all the time now.
That's a great answer. I mean, it's the most common answer I get is financial
literacy.
Yeah. Luckily, to your point, like it's becoming more intentional in schools, but it definitely still has a long way to go. A lot of adults as well. Like you said, we didn't get that opportunity in school. So there's still a lot of adults as well who need to develop that skill as well. Rachelle, you have a billboard. Everyone's going to see it. You can write one thing on that billboard. What does it say?
Oh, another one thing. Let's see. First thing that comes to mind, don't let fear stop you.
It's amazing. Yep.
It's just, yeah. I had another one, but that's the one that I've been trying to think about personally a lot lately.
Okay. I'll share another resource with you. It's a great one to do with students as well. And we'll link to this in the show notes. I've talked about this a bunch especially in season 1, but it's called the Fear Setting Exercise. It's by this guy named Tim Ferriss. And long story short, it's a 13-minute TED Talk, but it's a guided exercise. There's a framework that you follow, and it really just comes down to writing out, here's the scenario, what are the absolute worst things that could happen? And then through that reflection piece that you talked about, they're really honestly not that bad. And then if they are, you come up with a solution to, if that happens, what do I do now? Right. And it just allows you to get over the hump that much easier. And just the habit of writing it out and seeing that, oh, it's not actually that bad, allows you to kind of take the leap more. So if you just internalize it all in your head, all these what if scenarios.
All right.
Yeah. Rachelle, you're a big reader. You've obviously mentioned a bunch of books already. What's a book that you've read in your adult life that has had such an impact on you that maybe you wish you would have read it before you were 18?
Oh gosh, yeah, I have read a ton of books. I would say probably Brene Brown, anything by Brene Brown, specifically Daring Greatly, which is kind of over my shoulder too.
Nice.
But that book, and then I mean, there are a lot out there that aren't necessarily specific to like education either, that I wish that, especially that one when I was younger, that I would have read that, because I think I would have taken a lot more risks. I wouldn't have been so nervous about things. I would have shared my story a little bit more and who I was. And yeah.
She's powerful. My partner is reading Dare to Lead, is another one of her books right now, and it seems pretty awesome. Yeah. So Rachelle, wrap this up first. Where can listeners go to learn more about you, all the amazing work that you're doing, anything they want to check out?
I'm pretty consistent across all things. If anybody wants to connect with me on, let's see, Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse, my blog, my podcast, it's always RDENE 915, Rdene 915, which is first initial, middle name, and birth date. Just to throw that out there. Everybody always says, where's the 915 from? But I do have a blog and, email. I would love to hear from anybody that's doing things like project-based learning, or, how things are going, and share resources, but don't hesitate to reach out. I'm not the expert, but if I can help in any way, just let me know.
Cool. Yeah. And again, we'll link to all those in the show notes. So Rachelle, I can't thank you enough for taking time, sharing your story. Again, I'm a big fan of project-based learning. So looking forward to what other projects you and your students get up to for the rest of the year.
All right. Thank you.